Just get him snack like, No, what he's saying is that footage would be good for part of the promo.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he chews and all sorts of stuff while right into the mic, so it's fine.
Testing. Hello. Okay. Shall we?
Go ahead.
Right.
When you open the door for somebody else.
Welcome back to the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. I almost said Dr. Bob.
You almost forgot my name.
Melissa and Dr. Bob, yes. Welcome back, everybody. We have been gone a little bit. The last few weeks, we only posted, I think, one episode a week.
Shame.
And we've gotten super busy, you guys. Like, I don't know, life is getting very complicated. A lot of stuff is going on. Melissa and I have some great plans, which she has told me I can't tell you about until next week. So
I'm so demanding.
So I'm not telling the podcasting audience what the big plans are, but there are big plans.
No one will ever know.
Well, they'll know next week.
All right.
She said I can say it next week, but I don't know why I'm talking about it, because this is kind of this is like your baby, your idea that Melissa's not having a new baby.
Also, why are you talking about it when you can't tell them about it?
I know. Well, that's the fun of it.
Yeah, okay.
That's the fun of podcasting.
Stay tuned.
All right. Anyway, welcome back, everybody.
Welcome.
But yeah, I just did want to say, I'm sorry for, again, like not, posting as many shows lately, but we hope you were getting, a lot of value out of the last few episodes. And I totally didn't realize it was Vaccine Injury Awareness month.
October.
Yeah. And so, our podcast that, I think, I don't know if we purposely did that or not, but the last episodes were devoted to that. I think now we're kind of moving into some other things. I think some other ideas.
But that interview with Barbara was so good. Wasn't that so good? I've gotten so many comments on that.
Yeah. I actually haven't listened to him yet.
What?
I totally haven't. I took a week off from listening to our podcast.
Good. They're so good.
Yeah,
She's so
anyway.
good. I love her.
Well, how have you been, Melissa?
I've been okay, and I'm excited about today's topic because I get so many. I've gotten hundreds of comments about our immunity episode we did in season 1 that talked about vitamin C and ways to stay healthy and how do you keep your immune system strong for your kids, yourself. So vitamin D has been a big thing people talk about. And then recently there were these 2 articles about vitamin D and influenza and what is better or what keeps you healthier. And then there was this article written by Dr. Mercola about how vitamin D is actually more effective than the flu vaccine. I shared it, and it was shared 3,000 times.
Oh, wow.
Within one evening.
Wow. It's because I didn't share it.
Exactly.
Yes.
And
actually,
so it was,
tell people about that.
Yes, because as you guys know in our censorship article, like certain things and certain people get sort of blocked from the algorithms for Facebook for sharing what shows up on news feeds. And so even if you follow someone, they block certain people and their content from showing up on your newsfeed for you to see it and potentially share it. If it is something that is questioning in any way the vaccine program. So we've seen that happen, and that happened to me, and it happens obviously to your page. So when you share my stuff, that puts me on the radar. Yeah. And then my stuff would just be like sharing everywhere, and then all of a sudden drop to nothing. Yeah.
So I don't share much of your stuff anymore for that purpose because I don't want to shut it down.
Because you just don't like my content. So this thing was getting shared everywhere, and then all of a sudden, when anybody who shared it got a notification from Facebook, this article is proven not to be true, and it had some if you want to find out more information about the flu vaccine, visit the CDC website. And they actually had a pop-up, a full-on notification. And then all of a sudden, the shares went to 0. It went from totally flying around to nothing. And so we're going to go into that article because it's long and very well sourced and has a lot of information, a lot of studies that were talked about, specifically about vitamin D and how and why it is more effective than the flu vaccine. And of course, they can censor the article being shared, but let's talk about the actual information. So I've been really interested in this topic before. I get a lot of people commenting, asking what brand of vitamin D you use, asking more about the vitamin C protocol and things like that. So I know this is important to our listeners, even though vaccines are our topic. There's also this idea of how do you stay healthy? And my big thing has always been vitamin D is the most amazing preventative that you can use, and the only one that I use as a preventative. And so this article by Dr. McCullough is great. And it, let me see if I have the actual title of it. Do you have that one?
Well, I have, actually printed off of his site, mercola.com. Vitamin D is more effective than flu vaccine, study says.
That's right. Sorry, I had my Harvard study covering that. And this article is so great. So this was 2017, I think, when it originally came out, but it's so effective now as far as what it's talking about. So what he starts by saying is how the medical establishment says that the flu vaccine is the best way to fight off the flu, right? This is what we hear. This is the commercial advertising is all about the flu vaccine is the best and really only way to fight the flu. But what we already showed you guys earlier on in one of our earlier episodes we've covered the flu vaccine multiple times, is that we found in California state data that more than half of adults and children who had severe or fatal cases of influenza already had the flu vaccine. So this idea of you're going to have a milder case, the data doesn't support that.
Right.
Right? Remember that one we did?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the misconception is that you make a vaccine, it gives you antibodies in your bloodstream, it must therefore magically work and totally prevent the disease and make it so you don't catch the disease or pass it along. What researchers have realized and what the Cochrane database of systematic reviews figured out in their research that we showed last year is if you only look at flu vaccine research and you try to figure out what research is actually proven about the flu vaccine, is actually proven very little. Like the flu vaccine actually doesn't do much at all, and at least as far as what they've been able to prove through research. Yeah, I feel like they felt it might reduce your chance of feeling sick from the flu slightly. But they've never been able to prove it prevents you from catching it and spreading it to others. So there's no public health benefit. So I want to make that very clear. Overall, with all the hype, it gets the most hype of any vaccine and it's the least effective of any vaccine. And so people need to stop making false research claims, essentially.
Right. And the things that I want people to know kind of just off the top is that like we said, that the severe and fatal cases are showing over 50% already had the vaccine. The next thing is that this year's flu vaccine is showing to be about 9% effective, 9% against the stronger strains. And this is based on the Australian, their data based on their flu vaccine and how it worked through their season. Yeah,
but you know how they have to spin it. I got an email saying flu vaccine 45% effective this year. And then in parentheses against one of the strains that's going around.
Which again, if it's not the stronger strain, then isn't that the whole reason people are fearful of influenza? Is if it's a strong strain, they could be hospitalized. They could have a secondary bacterial infection and potentially die, right? This is the big concern. That would be a strong strain.
I know, but it's just funny. Like overall, it's only 9% effective, but they have to. That's not a headline. They can't put that in the headlines. So they have to figure out, okay, well, which strain is it super effective against, and we'll make that the headline so that people don't lose faith.
Sure. And then the other two things I want you to know is that the flu vaccine can actually make you more susceptible to other serious respiratory infections. And this comes down to my last point, which is when people think they have the flu, most of the time they don't. Like it's 10 to 20% of these lab tests is what it showed with the state data actually come back positive for influenza, which means 80% up to 90% of these cases are another respiratory virus that would not be covered by the flu vaccine. So influenza is not everybody's quote unquote flu that you think you have. And if the flu vaccine can make you more susceptible to respiratory infections, like based on that Canadian study in 2012, if that's happening and those respiratory infections are all around you, then you have a real risk of having some kind of illness that the flu vaccine is not going to help. So Dr. McCullough kind of goes into this study, and I have the copy of the actual study, but by Dr. John Cannell. who's the founder of the Vitamin D Council. And he was kind of the first one, according to this, that really started talking about the idea of a vitamin D deficiency and how that's related to respiratory infections like influenza.
Mm-hmm. I saw him talk.
You did?
Actually, yeah, he came to one of the integrative medicine seminars I went to maybe like 10 years ago. And yeah, he was the first person I've ever seen talk about how amazing vitamin D is and what it really does. And so it was kind of fun to see, kind of him, talked about in this research, and then even in a more recent study, having seen him sort of present some of his very first findings many years ago.
Because he's specializing like in this discussion about vitamin D and the deficiency and how it affects. And he goes into lots of details about exactly what happens with your fighter T cells and how they need the protein components, and they go searching in the body for vitamin D. And if they don't find it, they do not initiate their response, which means they will not go in to try to heal you if you have an illness. So he published this hypothesis in 2006 and 2008 in medical journals. And later that year, another study confirmed that these lower levels of vitamin D, people that have those lower levels have more cases of cold or flu. And the quote is, "The findings of our study support an important role for vitamin D in prevention of common respiratory infections such as cold and the flu." It's not even just the flu. It's all types of sicknesses that can happen. And Dr. John Cannell kind of went into this idea of the seasonal hypothesis of how come the flu is only during the winter and it's not really during the summer, and what does the seasonal connection have to do with people getting the illness and spreading the illness and having the risk of influenza, and why is it only during certain times? And of course, his answer is coming down to these lower levels of vitamin D during the winter time, which I know many people listening who have been holistically involved know. But another study talked about that covered 25 studies. It was a scientific review, right? They had 11,000 subjects in a dozen countries. And they said that people who took daily or weekly vitamin D supplements were less likely to report acute respiratory infections. Again, it's not just influenza, right? We're worried about acute, meaning strong respiratory infections, because again, those can turn into secondary bacterial infections that can turn into a serious complication, potentially death for some people.
Well, let me emphasize something you just said, because there's basically 3 ways to take vitamin D. You can take it every day. You can take like a whole week's worth once a week, or some people have actually looked at taking like a whole month's worth once a month, huge bolus doses. Mm-hmm. And they actually specify in the article here that they've actually found that like once a month bolus large doses doesn't seem to be as preventive as the daily or weekly smaller doses. So I think I used to actually tell people, take it, once or twice a month, just take a whole bunch. But the research on prevention might not actually bear that out. So look at daily or maybe no more than weekly dosing if you want to get the benefit.
And I know it's worked for my family and friends that I've told about and all that stuff. So, there are thousands of anecdotes about vitamin D and how it really prevents sickness, and especially for kids that are exposed to sickness all the time, which is what we want to do as parents, right? We want to avoid the kids getting sick, not just make their sickness go away quickly once they get it. We want to eventually avoid them getting sick altogether. But I found this really interesting when he goes in to talk about the NNT number. And is this a number is this something that you utilize in your practice, like often, like as far as your training and understanding like what this means and how it affects people, or what is advantageous and not advantageous based on this? This NNT number is called your number needed to treat. How many people would you need to treat to spare one person from being infected with something? Yeah,
like how many people would you have to give a flu shot to in order to spare one person from getting the flu? Right.
And you studied this, yes? We
studied it some. We don't use it a lot.
And this number, so for the flu vaccine, this number is 40. 40 people need to get the flu vaccine to save one person from getting influenza.
Right. And I remember some of the old Cochrane data that we talked about last year. I'm going to get the number wrong, but they actually looked at what is the number needed to treat as far as vaccinating hospital employees in order to protect one patient from getting the flu. Mm-hmm. And knowing that the vaccine doesn't actually even prevent you from catching the flu, or a hospital employee getting a vaccine for the flu doesn't prevent that hospital employee from catching it and spreading to a patient.
Right.
So it shouldn't even help at all. But they kind of hypothesized, well, what if it did help a little bit? They actually found you need to like vaccinate, like, I don't know, many thousands of hospital employees in order to prevent one patient from getting the flu from a hospital employee. It was something just outrageous, something that would completely not justify having mandatory vaccination policies for hospital employees.
Yeah, and so according to this, 40 people need to receive the flu vaccine. But interestingly, only 33 people have to take vitamin D to save one person from influenza. Okay. So it's actually more advantageous for people to supplement with vitamin D than even get the flu vaccine to protect other people from getting influenza. That is like a crazy statistic to think that the flu vaccine, you're going to require so many people to need it just to prevent one person from getting it. And you could just supplement with a vitamin that's natural with no side effects. I mean, even in high doses, I mean, you have to get to a very high number for this to be considered, potentially risky. Mm-hmm. And then what's even crazier is if you have an extreme vitamin D deficiency, that number to treat is only 4. That means only 4 people need to supplement with vitamin D to keep the spread of influenza, to keep that person safe. I mean, 4, that is like almost nothing. So their conclusion is that vitamin D supplementation is 10 times more effective in that circumstance than the vaccine.
Yeah. Basically, if you have a bunch of vitamin D deficient patients and you just boost their vitamin D levels, that is, like you said, 10 times more effective than if you gave all those D deficient patients just a flu shot.
Right.
Yeah.
And then people think, how common is vitamin D deficiency? It's actually very common. Tell me.
I just had my level tested.
Okay. Were you deficient?
Yeah. So I had it tested like 5 years ago and I was good. I was like in the 40s. It's good if you could be like in the 60s to 80s. But I was in the 40s. I was kind of decent. I just had it tested and, all my other lab work actually looked very good, but my vitamin D level was 25. So basically 30 or less is deficient and 20 or less is severely deficient. And so I was at 25 and that is very deficient. I mean, it's way lower than it should be. And so I immediately took a bunch, that day. And so, but actually I didn't know. I would have just taken a bunch once a month.
Right.
But you showed me this article. So now I know I actually should just take a good dose every day.
Well, according to this,
so I'll keep you guys, updated.
Everybody wants to know your vitamin D levels. It's estimated that about 1 billion people worldwide have low levels of vitamin D. And it says about 42% of adults are vitamin D deficient. That's like almost half, and this is just in the U.S., almost half of U.S. adults are deficient in vitamin D, which makes a lot more sense why people are so sickly all the time. And again, that sickness is now affecting other people because now you could be a healthy individual presented with it. You're presented with it so much more now because people are more sick, and then you have an increased likelihood to also get sick as well because the odds are sort of against you. But I found this super interesting that like racially this makes a difference. So saying that about 72% of Hispanic people are vitamin D deficient, 70%, and over 82% of African Americans are vitamin D deficient. And that has to do with the tone of the skin and the ability to actually take in vitamin D from the sun. And that's something that listeners are, if you're listening and that's one of your categories, you might need to think about supplementing when you hadn't thought about it before, because statistically, according to the PubMed article, prevalence and correlates of vitamin D deficiency in U.S. adults, this is 2011, there are high numbers of individuals with low levels of vitamin D. And just like anything else, what they recommend to be like your level, 1,000 IUs a day is like way too low for most people. And so doctors are not even recommending the right amounts to be taking. So most people are going to be lower because if they're taking a multivitamin, it has like a low amount. And then some people are kind of, under the school that you should be getting it all from sunlight, which happens for some, but doesn't happen for others. And so I feel like it's relatively safe to be supplementing. Yeah.
I mean, I'm very much in favor of kind of looking at nature and how does the natural process work. And so for me, I am very much in favor of sunlight for people. Yeah, they've been able to prove that repeated sunburns raises your risk of cancer, but they have actually not proven that just regular sun exposure raises your risk of cancer. All you have to do is keep yourself from getting sunburned, really, if you want to, not overdo it on the sun. I mean, I feel like it all starts in pregnancy. You should get sunlight. You should get a good amount of sunlight in pregnancy so the pregnant mom has a lot of vitamin D. But you have that little baby. You know what? I mean, I laugh, but I was one of these parents. You would literally put a blanket over your baby when you step outside because, God forbid, the direct sun actually shine on your baby's skin, your baby's going to melt. You see parents literally like running to the car, shadowing, like keeping their baby in shadow because they've been trained sunlight cannot touch your baby. I think the opposite is true. I think moms should nurse their babies outside, spend, like nurse on one breast outside. So the baby gets 10 or 15 minutes of direct sunlight. The mom's body is keeping the baby warm. The baby can be totally naked. So the baby's getting covered in sunlight for 10 or 15 minutes.
Are we going to have to bleep that word out?
I know, right? And so I've started telling, patients this, if I remember, or they ask about it, nurse outside. Yeah, you can't sit outside with your baby for an hour or two. They'll totally get burned. But if you have repeated 10 to 15 minute, periods of exposures, that is critical for a newborn baby to start generating that vitamin D. And then you want to continue that, throughout your childhood.
And it says that there are these risk factors for vitamin D deficiency. So this is for our listeners, in case you want to know what could push you in that category: having dark skin, elderly, if you're elderly, being overweight or obese, not eating much fish or dairy, living far from the equator where there's little sun year round, always using sunscreen when going out, or staying indoors, not getting that natural sun exposure. So if you fall into any of those categories, you might want to look into where your vitamin D levels are. And that could be a reason why you're getting sick all the time if you're one of these people who gets sick more often than you used to. And those levels, like you're saying, you were just tested not that long ago, those levels can change very frequently. So you kind of want to be on top of how you're feeling and how easily you feel you're getting sick to make sure your levels are in a good place.
Can I, caution people about dairy? Milk actually does not have vitamin D in it just naturally. They have to add it.
Right.
And so it's vitamin D fortified milk. But the amount of vitamin D in like 1 cup of milk is only maybe about 5 to 10% of what a person really needs in a day. So you're not getting much vitamin D in milk.
Supplementary.
Right. So it's a little bit, but it's not like, I drink, a glass of milk every day, I'm fine on my vitamin D. You're actually getting very little that way. You have to really rely on it through other means.
And some people use cod liver oil as a way to supplement really easily. So there was another study in 2010 that had over 400 children. Now this was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. Okay, so it showed that this I found was so interesting. It showed children who supplemented with vitamin D, and they were getting 1,200 IUs. They were 42% less likely, almost 50% less likely, to come down with influenza A. 42% just by getting 1,200
and that's more effective than the flu vaccine.
Way more. I mean, 42%, that is, and with no risk of side effect at that point. They were having a very low dose. And again, if it's working for influenza A, it's working for other respiratory illnesses and other sicknesses that come around during school time. Wouldn't everybody kind of want less school children sick, right? Especially around fall and winter time. Everybody's out. It affects everybody because somebody comes to school sick, you pass it to these other people. Now those people bring it back to their homes, passes to them. People have to miss out on work. They've done all these studies about money lost because of these illnesses. That's why you're supposed to get the vaccine to save society all this money. But if you could do the same thing and be more effective in that process by just supplementing with a vitamin and not just influenza, but all the other respiratory illnesses, doesn't that seem like that should be the go-to? I mean, wouldn't the CDC and the World Health Organization, shouldn't they be looking at this? Isn't this like the kind of information they should be trying to get out to people to have them and encourage them to be healthier? In theory, right? Isn't that the idea? Yeah. But that's not what happens.
I know. It should be. Can I mention real quick, maybe just for the science geeks out there, or for the physiology geeks or immunology, I like John Cannell's initial article, and again, we'll give you links to this. He kind of describes actually like scientifically what vitamin D is doing. And so everyone should know it is a hormone. It's not actually a vitamin. Excuse me. and it's in your skin. It basically lives underneath your skin. And when the sun shines on your skin, it changes the inactive vitamin D into an active hormone. So that hormone flows through your body, and it's called an immune system modulator. And what it does, it prevents your immune system from releasing excessive inflammatory cytokines. And so it prevents inflammation, so the immune system doesn't overreact to things. But then it actually increases the ability of macrophages, which are like the white blood cells that kind of live in the linings of things. They're the first white blood cells to attack something. Vitamin D actually helps macrophages attack germs and secrete all their germ-killing chemicals all over the germs and kill them like right at the point of entry. And then it also actually acts. Vitamin D, I just find this fascinating. Vitamin D as a hormone, it attaches to the outside of white blood cells, and it sends a signal into the genes of the white blood cells, and the genes in the white blood cells turn on and start telling the white blood cells to start producing antimicrobial peptides, which are proteins that kill germs. And essentially, so it's like the vitamin D itself isn't doing anything. Like a lot of antioxidants, like vitamin C or certain things, will maybe like have a more direct effect on the germs. Vitamin D essentially makes your own immune system have the direct effect on the germs, and it makes 5 different types of white blood cells turn on and then start attacking things. So I just kind of find that a little fascinating. I love how Dr. Cannell kind of started writing about this again 13 years ago. And interesting back then. It's still interesting today. Are you fascinated, Melissa?
No, this is called Epidemic Influenza and Vitamin D, and this is 2006, and then published again, and later in 2008 it was adapted. So this is the article he's talking about. Yeah, in the article, another thing I find really interesting, as he goes into breaking down the science behind what vitamin D does and how it affects those T cells, he talks about how, this idea of the seasonal concept of influenza, and how they were saying, well, people congregate indoors during the winter, right? That's why the flu passes around during the winter. But what they proved in some earlier research is people still congregate indoors during the summer. They actually looked at human behavior and saw the same patterns. People still go to work. People still have church and different things that they're doing, and grocery stores and all those types of things. And but what they found was that summertime deaths due to influenza are extremely rare, except during pandemics. But even during pandemics, most deaths occur during the colder months. So even though influenza, you're together in these, you're congregating together, people weren't dying from the flu.
Okay. Right.
Which is really what everybody worries about, right? People aren't just worried about getting it. They're worried about dying from it.
Yeah. So during the winter, when you're indoors, when you're getting less sunlight, because you're dressed in long clothing, so when you are outside, you're still covered up.
Right.
So you're not getting nearly as much vitamin D in the winter time, and that's why more people are dying in the winter. And they kind of discovered that early on.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why his theory of vitamin D predicted these observations that they saw, which was suppressing that cytokine response. And during the summer, that UVB radiation is what kind of induces that production of vitamin D, and it wasn't happening during the winter. And then this article, this study goes into talking about even supplementing with 2,000 IUs per day failed to achieve the vitamin D levels that they needed for certain people. And for some, they had to keep going higher, and it depended on the race and other things like that. And there were no side effects in all their testing that they did, except for, and this is so funny, it says no side effects other than an improved mood. That was listed as a side effect, which I'm sure most people would probably be totally fine having an improved mood. But they talked about how important the dose is and that kind of stuff, and how even these pharmacological doses, how in the hospital, what they're suggesting is people that are treated and that are actually like admitted to the hospital for respiratory illness should be given these super high doses, 1,000 to 2,000 IUs per kilogram per day for several days to treat the viral respiratory infection, especially in the wintertime, meaning this would be a new type of treatment for hospital staff and for medical staff, which is not something you hear people talking about.
Yeah, and even though giving such a huge dose, they think might not prevent problems, but you're talking actually treatment once you're actively sick.
Right.
You take a big dose right at the beginning of that. And I don't think they've concluded whether or not that's helping.
They're saying that this is something that people should look into.
Right. It's a theoretical.
It is, but they said that they're because the vitamin D had the ability to stimulate those antimicrobial peptides, like you were talking about, that they should look into pharmacological doses as a treatment specifically. Yeah. And then obviously, if you don't have a vitamin D deficiency, that's a preventative in itself. So you wouldn't even be there. Right. But if you're going to be there, then you might as well, you could treat your body. And Dr. Mercola has talked about these high doses as well. But, in the conclusion of Dr. Cannell's study, he says that vitamin D deficiency is endemic, and it has been associated with many of the diseases of civilization. So when we look at the whole vaccine debate and we're talking about all the ways that we're trying to prevent disease, control disease, and not let diseases come back, he's literally saying, based in history, that we're talking about vitamin D deficiency, which is responsible for many diseases in people over time. And again, this is not something your doctor's coming to you and saying, or your pediatrician and saying, why don't you make sure your children are, have good vitamin D dosing? Instead, they're like, are you up to date on all your vaccines? And that's what the well visit appointments are all about. They're all about that. Yeah. It's not actually about, is your child healthy enough to avoid getting infection and prevent these kind of diseases? So I had a friend contact me recently about, I'm worried about the flu vaccine. She vaccinates and she fully and they're kind of on the fence on the flu vaccine this year. And I said, well, one, it's 9% effective this year against the stronger strains, but also healthy children and healthy adults don't die from influenza. Healthy children that have not been, and healthy adults that have not been given some other over-the-counter combination that kind of triggered a problem, it's not normal for your body not to be able to fight it off unless you have some kind of rare condition, right? And in that rare condition, if your immune system is so compromised, wouldn't the goal be to get your immune system to a stronger position? And to get your immune system to a stronger place using vitamin D supplementation, then you're going to be able to fight off not just influenza, but everything else as well. And if you're immunocompromised, that's a big concern for you. Right. If you're not immunocompromised and you're a healthy individual, you shouldn't be dying of influenza. You might get it. Like my kids got some type of flu-like thing around New Year's time, and it was like a 3 to 4 day process. It was a stronger thing, but it wasn't. We never had to go to urgent care. We never had to go to the hospital. We never had to treat with over-the-counter remedies because we use natural remedies. But you shouldn't be afraid of influenza. In other words, and if they know that civilizations have died from these huge influenza outbreaks, and there's a way that we can actually make sure that society is stronger. I can't understand why this is not something Paul Offit's talking about, and this is not something Senator Pan and all these people are talking about. How to make schools safer, not just for influenza, but all the other stuff going around. Yeah,
why not mandate vitamin D dosing for all school children?
And make sure that doctors have notified you about your need to do that, and you have to get a letter signed from that physician that he has let you know about all the pros and cons of vitamin D supplementation. But of course, that's not what happens.
Right.
And the T cell thing that we were talking about earlier is really interesting, and I encourage everybody to read this study if they want to go into the scientific stuff. And you mentioned the Cochrane report.
So you're saying I can't go deeper into the science?
You can't, but if there's a science geek out there that wants to, they can.
I'll do like a supplemental broadcast after Melissa leaves today. And
this blows my mind. It's too much for me. So, but the Cochrane report in 2012, we've talked about this before. We've done 3 or 4 different episodes on the flu vaccine. The 2012 Cochrane report says that the influenza vaccine has only a modest effect in reducing influenza symptoms and working days lost. But it says there is no evidence that they affect complications such as pneumonia, and more importantly, or transmission.
Right.
And you gave this quote in our previous episode. that this vaccine is not stopping the transmission of the flu virus.
Right.
It is not stopping people from having complications. Again, that's what everybody's worried about. They're worried about it spreading, and they're worried about getting complications and it turning into something else. This data is showing you that it is not actually connected to those two things. It is not going to help those circumstances. Right. In other words, why do it? I mean, if you can supplement with vitamin D and get yourself to a healthy place, and then, like the washing of hands and staying out of public places when you're sick and all those kind of things, like, aren't there other ways maybe that we could stop the spread of the flu that don't involve all this like mass advertising at every store with all the free goodies they want to give, like ice cream? It's always like some kind of sugary thing too, like the flu shot and free ice cream. It's like that's the last thing you want. If you're going to be reducing and suppressing your immune system to make you more likely to get a respiratory infection, the last thing your body needs is a big dose white sugar just to help weaken it just a little bit more. And that's kind of funny, right? Because if the focus is on health, that sort of just seems completely ironic to me. And that's not the first one I've seen. I saw another one. It's like the flu vaccine and free candy, like for kids or something. And I'm like, this is so ironic. This is supposed to be about health. And I know everybody listening is probably like, oh my God, yeah, I've seen that too. You talked about this, about the senior citizens, how there's really no proof that the flu vaccine actually shows positive safety or efficacy for elderly. And it says that in that Cochrane report also, where they also say, you just were talking about this, there's no evidence that vaccinating healthcare workers prevents influenza in elderly residents. Now, this was in long-term healthcare facilities, but you know how they make that mandatory for everybody? Mm-hmm. And they're saying there's no proof that that actually does anything. And yet it's a condition of your employment, which many people are uncomfortable with.
I know. A lot of nurses groups and some physicians groups are trying to fight against mandatory hospital policies. And some people have actually sued and won their cases, against hospitals for this. And I'm so perplexed why the science is very clear that there's no evidence that the vaccine prevents transmission. Yet when you're like a hospital board or a hospital, a committee trying to make these policies, they just can't grasp the idea that a vaccine doesn't help that. Like, to them, the vaccine has to help that.
Or a medicine, right?
Like, there's no way it can't help. I mean, we just have to assign all these magical abilities to these vaccines. And once that's implanted into doctors' minds, then of course the next step is that all doctors and medical personnel have to get this treatment. And again, I mean, most people know, but I mean, big pharma, they give a lot of donations, a lot of supports and grants to hospitals, and they help support hospitals, and the whole pharmaceutical industry helps support our healthcare industry. And I just got to wonder if this is sort of, it's probably more subconscious, but this is how these hospital boards are giving back by mandating the products that have no science to back them up. And that'll bug me until the day I die. I don't know if I'll fix it, before I die, but we're going to keep trying. Right?
But if you're supplementing with vitamin D, you won't die from influenza.
Yes, excellent.
So that's
Thank
good.
you. And I won't now because I'm going to boost my levels up.
There you go. The last study I want to mention is that this Canadian study. So in this Dr. Mercola article, he kind of goes through all these different studies to give different types of research to kind of verify and connect why vitamin D helps, is more effective than the flu vaccine. But this Canadian study in 2008 showed that people that got the flu vaccine were twice as likely to get the 2009 flu. Mm-hmm. So by getting it the year before, by getting that vaccine, they were twice as likely, meaning you are not only did this not protect you, but you have a higher chance now, twice as likely, to actually get influenza, which was the thing you were vaccinated for. And of course, in 2009, the swine flu was a very serious strain that caused, a lot of risk and scare. And I just posted about this on my Facebook recently, but this, the American Thoracic Society posted a study about children that said if you get an annual flu shot as a child, you are 3 times higher risk of hospitalization for influenza.
Wow. And
now this is specializing in kids that have asthma, but they were talking about general kids, and they said for asthmatics, it's even worse. So an average child has a 3 times increased likelihood for hospitalization from influenza if you get an annual flu shot. Because remember that other study that talked about It's most effective if you have not gotten a flu shot in 5 years.
Okay.
If you're getting them on a regular basis, you're actually decreasing the likelihood for it to work on a subsequent year. So these children have 3 times higher likelihood for hospitalization if you're getting the annual flu vaccine. I mean, it would make any parent wonder, right? Or question, why are we getting it then if it's not
What was
helping?
that about asthma?
That it's even that risk is even higher for asthmatics.
So if you have asthmatics and you get a flu shot, you have an even higher
than
risk
3
of getting
times.
hospitalized,
Right.
For a
Higher than
respiratory
3 times,
infection.
yeah.
That's so ironic because
It is.
asthmatic kids are the first people that the flu shot was designed
Of
for.
course. Well, elderly too, though, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you just said there's no proof that it works for elderly.
They said you have to give that flu shot to everyone with asthma because if they get the flu, they're toast. And what research is showing that the opposite might actually.
And then I
be
love
true.
how these conclusions will be like, not to say the flu vaccine's bad, but more research needs to be done. It's like, well, you literally just said the flu vaccine's not working. And then it'll be like, not to conclude, because, they have to sort of cover their bases.
Exactly.
So if people don't know, vitamin D deficiency is linked to a lot of things. It's linked to Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, depression, autoimmune disease, preterm births, and many other chronic diseases. So this is not something to take lightly. This is not just about influenza. This is about overall health, overall well-being. And like I mentioned on that other one, the big things I say about ways to stay healthy, to prevent these kind of things, vitamin D, and then eliminate white sugar or almost reduce it or almost eliminate it completely. Because even Dr. Mercola's article talks about how sugar reduces the function of your immune system. And the goal should be how to get your immune system to work well, not how to cover it up. Like, let me give my kid ice cream while they get the flu vaccine, because that flu vaccine is going to keep them from getting sick, because I don't want them to get sick. I want them to be healthy. But I just gave them sugar, which just reduced their immune system. And it's like this awful cycle. And then people just get more susceptible to other sicknesses, spreading them around to other kids that come home and spread them to families and babies that are in those families. So this is actually something that people should be taking very seriously, because this does affect society. And the sun exposure, natural sun exposure, you said is the way to go. If not, supplement or check your levels.
Go eat lunch outside every day. I mean, it's the hottest part of the day, but if you're sitting out there for 20 minutes, that's a lot of vitamin D.
A lunch to yourself every day. Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Doesn't everybody get that?
I'm sorry, is that what you get every week?
Yeah.
That's so nice.
I mean, I'm working hard at my job.
Then why do you have vitamin D deficiency?
And then I make my lunch. I go sit outside. Actually, I have a beach chair in my trunk of my car.
By yourself though?
Yeah.
Nobody's
it's
nagging
amazing.
you.
You should try it.
Oh, okay, yes, I should do that. My lunch would be at 2:00 during nap time every day, just late, just to get that time. But vitamin D, basically, if you didn't understand at the end of this episode that vitamin D is the way to go, it's a preventative, it works, there's so much scientific data to back it up. You can check all these different articles out. Again, the Dr. Mercola article is called "Vitamin D is More Effective Than Flu Vaccine, Study Says." The Harvard Gazette posted, "Study confirms vitamin D protects against colds and flu," and that was in 2017. And that talks about what we talked about today. And then the Dr. John Cannell study is called "Epidemic Influenza and Vitamin D." The links will be there for you guys to go through. But personally, I feel like this stuff is so valuable to understand how to keep you and your children healthier, and maybe to prevent against those illnesses that people are still worried about if you are opting out of the vaccine and you still want to make sure that you are targeting it. And go visit our other episode too about health and immunity if you want more ways to kind of boost it. But
I want to also just throw out, Dr. Mercola has been long known and respected in the field of nutrition and healthy immunity. And something I didn't know, and he mentions that if you're supplementing with vitamin D and you're having a hard time getting your levels up, you might need to take add more vitamin K2. Right. And magnesium in your diet, and those can help increase your vitamin D levels. I didn't know. I might have to look into that. But I never like relying on one thing. You can't just stay inside all day and take a bunch of vitamin D. I mean, you have to be outside. You have to be eating healthy.
But if you're not eating healthy and you're not going outside, definitely take vitamin D.
But I would say even if you're going outside and eating healthy, take vitamin D as well.
Yeah.
And
I think
we should tell people, how much and what kind. I mean, I don't know what the best, brand is of vitamin D or the best kind. I tend to tell people to find if it's for a kid, find a drop where every dose is 1 drop and is in some sort of oil.
Right.
And so like, I mean, you can buy, there's one brand I've seen, it's like the ingredients literally are vitamin D and olive oil. That's all that's in there.
So I use KAL is the name of the company, Cal, and they have 2,000 IU drops, which is what I give. Yeah,
2,000 per drop.
Right, and it's liquid, and you can get it at your natural food store. If you get it on Amazon, they only have the vitamin D with the K2, D3 with K2, which is okay because that's not a bad thing anyway. You won't be able to find their brand, but you can find it in like a Whole Foods or a natural food market. Easy for kids, and you could literally, they could just take it by the drop. They don't have to hide it in something. It's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, I feel comfortable telling people to give their like toddlers and preschoolers and children easily, 2,000 units, like 1 drop of a 2,000 unit product. Maybe not every single day. I mean, maybe a few days a week. I mean, if you've checked your levels and you need to raise your level, then your doctor's probably going to tell you to take 2,000 every single day if you're a child. But if you don't know your levels, you could take 2,000 very safely, at least a few times a week. And if you're an adult, they say take 5,000 a day,
right? Just
for basic health maintenance.
What I do.
If you're low, you have to take like 10,000 a day or more to raise the levels up.
And this is going to sound high to people who look at the back of a multivitamin.
Right. This is high.
I don't want you to freak out because just remember that a lot of what doctors recommend right now is lower than we might actually need. And certain things, even like magnesium, it's like magnesium used to be in the soil, and so we didn't need to supplement with magnesium because the fruits and vegetables that you were getting from the ground had enough of that. It's not like that anymore. And because of our lifestyle and things that people aren't outside as much, they're not getting the right levels of vitamin D and they're not assimilating it the right way. So some of this seems like, well, that's not what my doctor said, or that's not what the multivitamin says. Just remember, some things have changed. And as we know, some things doctors recommend are a little outdated.
Yeah.
This is one of them.
Yeah. Vitamins typically have only 400 units of vitamin D in it.
Which is teeny.
And some adult ones might have 800 units. But again, you have to take a lot more than that, on a daily basis. And if you have a young baby, a lot of people will say start giving newborns vitamin D drops, like a 400 unit vitamin D drop for a newborn baby every day. Even though that seems like that might be a good idea, I mean, and everyone kind of recommends that for newborns. So I kind of always question, well, if it's a newborn and you're trying to keep their gut, healthy and pure and only give colostrum and then only give breast milk, I'm not sure if we should be giving actual newborns something artificially generated.
But could the mother supplement and she's breastfeeding?
Yeah, so that's why a mom, you're pregnant, you should get your levels checked. You should supplement appropriately. Make sure you have good levels during pregnancy. And then during breastfeeding, a mom should, take a good amount of supplementation. Certainly when the baby starts getting foods in their gut, so it's no longer just breast milk, they're getting food. Then 6 months, you can certainly add a vitamin D drop, whether it's 400 units or whether you're going to do maybe 1,000 a few days a week on a 6-month-old baby. You can ask your doctor if you should start your 2-month-old baby on infant drops. I mean, a lot of that might just depend on the mom's level or depend on a lot of things. But
also if your kid's getting sick a lot, like if you notice your kid gets sick so easily, that would be my first cue that I need to go look into that, because people don't ever think of that being a real thing. But like if your kid is the one that always catches the colds when other people don't, I would immediately look into reducing sugar and supplementing with vitamin D and see if you notice a change over time.
And Mercola also talks about garlic as showing actual research that shows it reduces the duration of illnesses by about a day. And he says that's about the same as taking antiviral prescriptions for the flu. They reduce your symptoms by about a day.
But it also reduces your friendships by by more than that.
I know. So, there's garlic. He talks about vitamin C. He talks about zinc and oregano oil, all this crazy herbal stuff.
All these natural remedies. What?
But it's kind of a good article at the end. He really kind of hits you with a number of things.
And he sources everything. He's got all the links to everything in this article too.
So, you guys, there's so much you can do. I mean, you don't have to take these illnesses lying down. You can prevent.
No pun intended. Where's our drum kit?
What's funny is there really was no pun intended.
Like you literally don't.
I know.
Take them.
No, but I mean, there's so much you can do preventatively before you get sick, and there's a lot you can do when you do get sick. Let's be smart about it, and you don't just have to rely on pharmaceuticals. Anyway, is anything else interesting?
I don't think so.
No?
I think all of that was so interesting that we've
yeah.
like hit our interesting quota for the day. I've been asked about this a lot. So that's why I thought this is the time.
Right.
Everybody's getting bombarded with flu shot stuff right now. So this is the time to talk about it.
But it's so funny. I mean, every single year it's all about the flu shot. We've said this already, but I would just love to see, wash your hands a lot,
Right.
take extra vitamin D, go outside, get extra sunlight, eat less sugar, be careful at Halloween. You don't overload on sugar. Don't overload at Christmas or Hanukkah or the whole holidays. Don't overload with all the junk. And talk to your doctor about getting a flu shot and, ask your doctor. Why can't it be like the other commercials? Ask your doctor if the flu shot's right for you instead of come to the street corner. We're giving out, free flu shots. I mean,
and candy.
Yeah, and candy. I mean, there's so much we should be talking about instead of just the flu. And then that's probably why we're
And
here
even the
talking
vitamin
about
C protocol, which is what we talked about that in the other one. If you do come down with something, how can you minimize that and keep that from being an urgent care trip or over-the-counter medication? How can you keep your kids learning how to fight things off quickly and easily and naturally? That's what we need to be talking about. So it's like prevent it with vitamin D, treat it with vitamin C, and know how to do it appropriately and keep your kids healthy and keep everybody else healthy.
Yep.
And that doesn't necessarily require 69 doses of vaccines for all these things. Anyway.
Well, you guys, we realized last week, or by the time we air this, maybe a couple weeks ago, our website was down. Our website was like totally messed up for a little while. So, but if you were like totally wanting to donate and you're just like
$35,000 to $40,000 on like a one-time payment, that if that was you,
I know.
It's back up, right?
Yes, the website is back up. You can go ahead and make those donations, and we will be in great need of those donations once we want to do the thing I can't tell you that we want to do. But yeah, we so appreciate it. I get an email every time we get a donation, and patients. Some people will mail checks into the office to avoid the donation fees, and I love getting those checks. I always take pictures and text the picture to Melissa. And
to clarify, he loves getting them, not because he's like, oh yeah, I'm getting a check, but like because of what it means as far as what we're able to do. Yeah,
and that you guys are out there, and that this is important to you, and that you want us to do more, and you want us to spread the word all over the country, all over the world. So
you mean by taking trips like all over the country? What are you talking about?
You're
not supposed to be talking about these things.
Yeah, so that's totally
this
not
hypothetical. Completely. Anyway.
Should we cut that part? Or
no. Cut what? What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Of course. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode on health, immunity, vitamin D, and influenza, and how natural supplementation may be doing more for us as a society than adding some type of pharmaceutical product on top of it. Shocking.
Yep.
And if you want to hear more, check out season 1 on our immunity episode. I don't remember what that one was, but had a lot of good facts in there too about how to stay healthy. And
re-listen to the flu episodes. I mean, what we said last year still applies this year. If you want to actually hear all those data on the flu vaccine, just go back to flu season of episode 1, whenever, November we did it or something.
November to June.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, you guys. We'll see you next time on the Vaccine Conversation.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.